Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to our expert panel, Scaling AI Across Your Business, Transform Processes, Secure Outcomes, and Empower Teams, brought to you by our friends at AtScale, Monte Carlo, and Revify. I'm Brian Mink, co-founder and president of Data Science Connect, the world's largest data and AI community. Today, we're excited to welcome hundreds of attendees from all over the world to dive into one of enterprise AI's biggest challenges and opportunities: scaling AI responsibly and effectively across the business. AI pilots are easy, but operationalizing AI across teams, systems, and workflows, that's where things get complex. Siloed tools, uneven model governance, and growing shadow AI efforts often get in the way. This session is all about how to break through those barriers. We'll explore how unified AI strategies, spanning both predictive and generative use cases, can streamline operations, increase oversight, and empower teams to move faster with less risk. We're joined by our expert panel today: Dave Mariani, Chief Technology Officer and founder at AtScale; Michael Segner, Product Strategy at Monte Carlo; and Girish Bhatt, SVP at Revify. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. To make this feel a little more in person, we suggest you add a photo to your profile and include your bio, LinkedIn profile, and other information that you want your fellow attendees to see. Next, please take advantage of the Q&A and chat features in the right sidebar. We'll be addressing your questions throughout the webinar, so be sure to upvote the questions you'd like the panel to address. If you're wondering where your organization stands compared to others on your AI journey, check out the poll questions in the right sidebar as well. And finally, to learn more about how to scale AI, check out the calls to action below throughout the webinar from our sponsors. Now, without further ado, I want to welcome our panelists to the stage. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll kick things off with intros. So if each of you could just tell us a bit about yourself, what you do in your current role. Why don't we start in the order that you appear on my screen? So Michael, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so I'm Michael Segner. As Brian said, I work in product strategy for Monte Carlo. We're the leader in the data and AI observability space. We help companies ensure their data and their AI outputs are reliable and high quality. So in that role, I get to speak to these teams every day about their challenges and best practices, and really just excited to share them with you all today.
Excellent. Girish?
Sure. First of all, thanks, Brian, for hosting all of us. I'm Girish. I'm with Revify. Revify is focused on building pioneering AI agents for data management and data operations. Over the past several years, we have been helping customers such as AMD, Verisk, Stanley Black & Decker, Ocean Spray, and others to shift from manual siloed data management to more of a unified self-driving approach, helping them realize up to 60% or more in data cost savings, and as well as 10x improvement in operational efficiency for AI and data workloads. I'm really excited to be part of this panel and looking forward to diving in.
Excellent. Dave?
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Mariani. I'm the CTO and co-founder of AtScale. AtScale is the world's first universal semantic layer. We founded the company 12 years ago with this expressed intent to take business data and make it consumable by the business in their terms with a single source of truth, so we could deliver governance and consistency across a wide variety of consumption. Now, with the era of agentic AI, semantic layers are more important than ever. So thanks, Brian, for inviting me. Can't wait to talk about and tackle this topic.
Excellent. Well, we'll kick things off with our first question. So a lot of organizations, have been running AI pilots for at least the last couple of years, and are trying to figure out, especially on the Gen AI front, how to take these from pilot to production, and how to scale this within large enterprises. So what do you guys, from your perspective, see as some of the most common friction points that stall that kind of AI adoption at scale? Dave, why don't we start with you on that one?
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably have read the MIT study that showed that 95% of Gen AI projects fail, which is pretty stunning number. And a lot of the sort of key takeaways there were that things like chatbots, while there's a lot of people who want to use them. So they have, I think they said like 83% of adoption of users for chatbots to do really simple tasks. But then once you started trying to do something a little bit more complex, things go off the rails. And so, because it demands really context, and without the context, without an appropriate governance infrastructure, it's really hard to sort of roll these things out at scale with safety and consistency. And then there was also something interesting about like a verification tax, they call it. So in other words, it takes so much effort to actually make sure that these these agents are returning the right data. It takes too much time to basically check and double check the results, and so much time that friction really destroys whatever ROI you're trying to achieve. So I think it's really hard to do this and roll that out at scale. There's a lot of friction there, in moving something that seems to work in a POC to something that's going to work in production for a broader set of people.
Yeah, great points, Dave. Girish?
Sure. Dave makes some great points regarding the MIT report. I'll come to that. So what I feel is scaling AI is a lot more complex than creating a prototype on Lovable or Replit and saying, hey, look, in 30 minutes, I built a native AI app. Everyone is happy about that. And most of those are 99.99% are not enterprise ready, and they don't even scale, right? So I feel it's more like trying to turn a paper airplane that you make it or a cut piece of paper into a passenger jet. That's the difference. So I think Dave started off with this. It's about the use cases. You need to pick the right use case. And in the case of the MIT study, they were trying to consumerize AI for the enterprise without really looking at the enterprise workflows. That is, does it integrate well? Are they talking the enterprise language? Just because the chatbot example worked well as an individual consumer or perhaps as a research tool, the enterprise workflows or pipelines were built over the years or maybe even decades sometimes, right? So I think it's a use case integration is critical. And I think the other part, which it becomes all about data. Everything about data is a major issue. It's not just about having the right data, but do you have the right context? Is the quality of the data good? Are you observing it? Are you acting upon it? And also, do you have the right controls in place for cost and performance? So I think these are some of the things. It's about the use cases, integration with the enterprise use cases and workflows, and also everything about data.
Yeah, excellent points. Workflows and data. Michael, your thoughts?
Yeah, I really like what Girish said about these enterprise workflows. It's really critical. I think we've been in this AI space in this kind of race for a couple of years now, and we're starting to see these leaders and these laggards. And I think the leaders are those who are realizing that AI readiness, that AI ready data is this goal, but they're not making it a gate for these initiatives to get off the ground. And where I think those pockets of enterprise workflow ready data are today, if I'm looking at our customer base and looking at the ones that have the most successful agents in production at scale today, a lot of them are leveraging the data that's already within their product and their UI. That is where their enterprise workflows are already, those standards are already very high. So a couple of examples here is we have a customer that is a platform for auto dealers in terms of managing their inventory and promotions. And so they have an assistant within that platform that is digesting a lot of the signals that they are providing some of these advanced recommendations that would take some level of training or expertise to navigate their eye and come to these types of conclusions, right? It's taking that initial signals into kind of actionable recommendations. Another example is there is a travel technology company that you put in a few different words like good, feud, and a view, right? And it provides a recommendation of a travel destination based on their past user behavior. Again, they're looking at their platform and the data that they already have that is of high level enterprise quality, ready to go. And they're having quite a bit of success with their agent in production. The last one I'll mention is same idea, but on the finance and production side, right? Going through all these signals in FinServ and being able to make these very sophisticated recommendations on forecasting. So I would just kind of extend what Girish is saying to take a look at your product, your UI, and find those pockets where you already have that AI ready data and move that into production and scale.
Yeah, great points. And selecting the right use case is absolutely a key. So in terms of, we talked about the friction points, but in terms of organizations that are doing this well, what do you guys see as being some of those key enablers that enable organizations to take these experiments and actually move them into production in a way that is sustainable and that generates ROI? So Girish, why don't we start with you on that one?
Yeah. So I guess the question, Brian, is more or less of how do we evolve from this one-off pilots or POCs to get to large-scale success, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. What I see is whether it's a trial, POC, whatever the motion is, PLG, sales-led, whatever it is, often it involves a simple workflow or a pipeline, and it's not quite realistic of what is needed in a full production environment. Because when it comes to production, you need entire repeatable, scalable, and quite likely automated workflows. So both Michael and I, we talked about the need for the robust data foundation and all the controls for that. That's all good. But the world has gotten so convoluted. People try to do everything in-house. That is do-it-yourself approach. The challenge with that is the foundational models continue to evolve at such a massive scale, and leveraging them may be the best way forward. And do you have the right level of visibility and tracking, and also how are you tracking the performance? Because I'll give an example. ChatGPT 5 was released a few weeks ago. We have been supporting all versions. In some cases, we recommend that our customers go back to 4.1 or 4.0, 4.1 in particular, because we are seeing that ChatGPT is not quite performing the right level at what 4.1 used to do. We do support Claude and Gemini and others as well. But the point is, to get to the production, it's no longer about trying just with a particular LLM or your own LLM, because the results will vary. How is the performance, and how many tokens are being used? Are you tracking that from an LLM operations or visibility perspective? These are the factors that some customers are doing. So we do offer all those options, and again, we leave it to the customer. They need to decide what's right for them, because it's a combination of both predictive and generative AI from our perspective. And we briefly talked about this, and I think this is an upcoming topic, right? About privacy, security, and compliance. It's a different scale at which you need to consider when you're doing a pilot or a narrow POC. Some of these things, you're essentially checking the controls, and then you're looking at this security, privacy, and compliance across the organizations, across all your workflows. So it's an ongoing challenge. So where it really comes down to is you need to think of a systems or a platform mindset. That's where some of our customers who adopt that platform mindset are succeeding.
Yeah, those are great points, Girish. And I think what you're getting at is that there are some just fundamentally different things that you have to think of at scale that you don't have to think of really at all or very much at the prototype pilot stage. So I think it's great points about token usage, all of that. That those things at scale really add up. They really are very impactful, and you have to think through them. Michael, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so a really great example of what not to do. I was talking to a data and AI system architect about their AI use case, and what they were essentially doing was using AI to interact with a large corpus of like these very technical manuals that were kind of critical to the business operations of the company. And they were so terrified of hallucinations that they went to extremes of only allowing like 75 inputs into like these distinct question answer pairs, or like locking down their document repository like Fort Knox. And while this is kind of extreme, we hear a lot of similar stories of these pilots that are in small scale, and they are afraid or nervous about the full of AI's non-deterministic nature and having that at scale. And I think the only way to kind of bridge that gap is to have trust in your AI outputs. And so there needs to be some level of monitoring to understand how can we make sure that these outputs are fit used, right? A, that they're not going to be damaging, but B, that they are accomplishing what we want them to accomplish. And when we talk about moving from pilots, where we have these known expected results, and then to production, where we don't necessarily have that golden data set, or we're at this such large scale, there are a lot of extra considerations that come into play, right? One of them being cost. How can you have some level of monitoring that is cost efficient so that you can, again, trust those outputs and scale these initiatives with trust? So I think if I had to boil it down to like really just one word, like the only way to get from that POC to full scale production is that your internal team has to be able to trust that it's performing in production, which requires some level of monitoring.
Yeah, great points, Michael. Dave?
Yeah, building upon what Michael said on trust. So my experience in dealing with this is really from a query perspective. So, you know, our semantic layer is sort of was made for business intelligence. So now people want to use it to provide context for chatbots, so they can do natural language query. And what Michael said is right. It's like there is you can't just rely on the LLM talking to a database and then expect to get the same answer each time you ask the same question. If those LLMs have to figure out how to navigate tens of thousands of tables and understand what you mean by gross margin, where everybody defines it differently, it's like you have almost 0% chance of getting it right, or you may get lucky once and get it right the rest of the times. So what we saw is that in using MCP, Model Context Protocol, as sort of an interface to allow the LLM to understand the context, we could then pass the semantic information to the LLM through the MCP, and then also make the LLM's job easier, because we could provide the semantic engine to actually navigate that data so that the queries are deterministic, not probabilistic. And that means that if you ask for a gross margin is going to be defined the same every time, and it's going to be the same outbound query to your data platform every single time. At the same time, that trust is not just trusting the accuracy, it's also trusting that your users aren't seeing data that they're not supposed to see. So that's where the governance also sort of fits in. So I've been blown away with how powerful using a protocol like MCP is to basically allow the LLM to understand context about your particular business that, of course, is not available on the general internet. And then letting the LLM do the magic, but do the magic with trusted data. I've seen things, oh my gosh, through Claude. It's like you ask a question, it doesn't just answer the question, it also says, and here's all the other insights I found. Oh, and by the way, let me build these charts so you can navigate them. It's like, it's crazy powerful if you can sort of give these LLMs access to truly trusted data.
Yeah, excellent points. And we have a great follow-up in the chat from Stanley. Stanley asks, what kind of KPIs and metrics do you use when monitoring outputs of AI initiatives to see if they are really delivering an impact for your business? So if you're in a situation where you're trying to not only have ROI, but prove ROI through various KPIs and report on that, what kind of metrics should you be looking at? Should you be reporting up the chain to justify investment in these production AI initiatives? Why don't we start with Girish on that one?
Yeah, sure. That's a fantastic question, Stanley. I have a long answer to that, but I'll make it very short for this session. So it's having the business impact metrics is a great starting point always. So I look at that in two ways, right? Is AI making you more productive? That's great, but you may be very inefficient by being productive, right? So it's always I always look at business impact metrics as one the overriding criteria. And sure, there are other criterias, because some CEOs are now requesting or mandating that everyone adopt AI tools, whether it's Cursor, Windsurf, or even Copilot for that matter, right? So business impact metrics, adoption metrics, reliability and performance, both Michael and Dave talked about hallucination or erroneous outputs. I mean, any of the LLMs, you pose a question slightly later or from a different part of the world, the answers will vary, right? And also about the governance and risk. I look at it in 4 ways. So to the other pointed question I'll give is, one capability we added within the Revify platform is we have something called automated warehouse management. We automatically baseline your, let's say, Snowflake, Databricks, BigQuery, Redshift kind of spend patterns in few minutes, and then we make recommendations saying that this is the savings you get, both from performance, quality, and cost perspective. And we have a button which will say, okay, commit this, and automatically the system can commit that for you, and you get a readout. That's aka you get a ROI report saying, okay, we reduce the size of this warehouse, whether it is your or slots within Google BigQuery, before and after, and you can really quantify the business outcomes in dollar amount so that you can make a case to your management, and if your management to your CEO or the board, saying how you are adopting AI to the success of the business.
Yeah, great points. Dave?
It's like for me, it's like it's about adoption and usage. I mean, it's like, I know it's a really cheap way and sort of unsophisticated way of judging success, but the idea that there is like, if people are using the service, they're using whatever the agent is, the chatbot, if it's interactive, the more people use it, the more value that they must be getting from it. And what I find, at least, especially in the business intelligence side of people, if things are too slow or they don't get the answers that they want, or it's too clumsy, they may try it once and then never come back. So I always look at adoption and look at the rate of that adoption to sort of be a good proxy, at least, for value. Doesn't mean they're getting value, but at least it's an easy to measure proxy for value.
Yeah, I'll echo Dave there. When we think about Monte Carlo and our own agent that we push into production, it's called the troubleshooting agent. It automatically identifies the root cause for a data quality issue. And the primary way in which we're measuring that value currently is through adoption. And I look at all the other agents across our customer base and how folks are looking at that. And to be frank, a lot of them are measuring the value in just as much as learnings as they are in dollars. And the business value still matters, right? The benefit to the business divided by the cost. There's no special sauce, like that is the value, right? But I think that it's still early days for a lot of these initiatives, and that it's constantly changing. There's a pharmaceutical company who is using AI to they're scraping the web, and then they are using AI to enrich their customer database before a match and merge process. And the way that they justified this project in terms of a value basis was that they were going to enrich so many records that there was going to be less records that needed human intervention, human stewards to enrich. And what they found was actually the exact opposite. Because what ended up happening is, yes, the medium records that went to human stewards, right? So the top level records, the ones that are most certain, those were automatically merged. The lowest thrown out. The ones in the middle went to human stewards. What they found was that the records at the bottom more went into that medium category, right? So yes, it was working. The ones in the middle went to the top. They were automatically merged. They had more records in the middle there. And so now all of a sudden they're looking at, all right, this is doing what we want to do. It's successful. It's got high adoption, but now we need to kind of go back and re-justify more in terms of we're getting better data and we're getting better outcomes versus what we thought was going to be cost reduction in terms of human steward hours.
Yeah, great points. And I think it also shows that you don't always know until you start rolling something out what the impacts are going to be and what the business impact is going to be. And so being agile in that way of, okay, as we start to scale this, what kind of unexpected results might we observe? So yeah, great points all around. Thanks for the question, Stanley. So getting to our next one, I think there a lot of executives have seen that while there are risks with moving quickly in larger enterprises with respect to AI, there are also risks of being a laggard. And one of them is this concept of shadow AI, where you have members of your organization who are basically going rogue and using unsanctioned AI, whether it's simple ChatGPT usage or more complex, where they're actually building their own vibe coded apps and deploying them in your enterprise environment. So there's all kinds of range of those kinds of activities that can go on in an enterprise setting and potentially compromise many aspects of your business and cybersecurity and privacy and other things. So how do organizations balance this idea of being able to scale fast enough to prevent some of this shadow AI from occurring, while also implementing robust governance and other sort of protections that you need at the enterprise level? Dave, why don't you start with that one?
Well, it's like I think you do have to. I think it was Girish who said that talking about the customer where they were so terrified that that the answers might be wrong, that they drastically restricted what AI was available or what questions were available to ask. I think that like that if you got to start from the approach of you know of really taking of making your culture a culture where all data should be consumable. And I think if you do that and you say that all data can be consumable, then you have to take actions to make sure that the governance is built in the foundations. Because I think that when it comes to shadow AI, I think it's really, again, I'm giving the perspective of the knowledge worker and the analyst. It's really hard to use ChatGPT. You can't use it to actually access your own inside the walls corporate data. You need to have some other access to that. So that still is gated. But at the same time, using ChatGPT to help synthesize a blog post, for example, is something that it's ideally suited for, and that's not dangerous or bad shadow AI at all. I just think that it's like if you really want to get rid of at least that the rogue shadow IT and shadow AI, you got to provide the foundations and let people self-serve confidently from those foundations. Otherwise, people will find a way to do it on their own, and you may not like what they do.
Yeah, great points. Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely echo that. I would take this from a slightly different perspective. With the teams I talk to, it's a little bit less about shadow AI and what I would call a little bit more like siloed AI, right? So it's not necessarily that there are these initiatives that are unsanctioned, to have a fully leveraged, AI pilot. It requires a lot of expertise, a lot of talent, a lot of organizational planning. And what I think maybe the biggest risk is some of these pilots that linger and they're using their own. I think Girish talked about this in the very beginning. They're using their own pipelines, their own architecture, their own databases. And the risk there is that it never gets, at some point, you don't want to stifle that innovation, but at some point it needs to graduate. It needs to move to a platform. It needs to become productionized. There needs to be some level of governance and monitoring on it. And so to me, that is kind of the shadow IT that is the biggest risk. It's not that nobody across the organization knows about it, but this pilot that is now in its second year and it's kind of still there and no one's really looking at it and we haven't really invested in the platform. So I would say that's kind of the perspective I would come to it with.
Yeah, great points, Girish.
Sure. I think both Dave and Michael are spot on. I want to go back in time. There is a famous quote in Jurassic Park, the first movie, where the quote is really life finds a way. I think bringing it back to AI, innovation in AI is finding its way into the enterprise. Having said that, I lived through the shadow IT, shadow wireless days earlier, a few years ago in my career. Enterprises failed, particularly something like AI. It's so disruptive and an enabler for companies. So I feel that enterprises should definitely make it provide the right incentives instead of curbing use of AI. What are creative ways we can use that? Like to Dave's point, you may not be able to use it right away with your your internal data. Perhaps you can, right? Providing the right incentives and tie to outcomes, both internal and external. That's what I feel. We need, yeah, sure, you need an AI policy and governance framework and all the usual enterprise kind of initiatives, but providing the right incentive and tying it to both internal and outcomes, external outcomes, I feel is a better way, so that you can circumvent the whole issue of, it's not about eliminating shadow AI, but rather about adopting AI for the right outcomes.
Yeah, great points, and tees up nicely for our next question about governance strategies, but specifically how to make governance strategies more lightweight, perhaps agile, to adapt to the times that we're in with AI, or maybe we don't. Maybe the existing frameworks work just fine. Interested to hear you guys' perspective on that. Of, you know, if you're trying to move quickly on AI, you're trying to deploy piloted use cases into production and not hold things up, but adhere to some at least minimum basic governance standards. How do you balance those strategies, and how do you sort of adapt maybe governance strategies that were built for a different time period where things were not moving at quite the pace that they are today? Michael, why don't you start that one off?
Yeah, whenever I think about governance, I think about the analogy of cars, right? Like you have to have brakes to be able to move quickly, right? Formula One cars have some of the best brakes in the world because they need to pivot quickly. And I think about this national media company that is using AI to tag their articles, and they are terrified of swapping out their embedding models. And I've come across this a couple of times where I think Girish referenced the idea of customers like not liking that update from Model 4 to Model 5. And that innovation can be stifled. Maybe there's a better model, maybe there's a better prompt, maybe there's a better way of configuring if you don't have those breaks. And I think from our perspective, one of those ways is, okay, have guardrails in place to catch the dangerous stuff, but then also have monitoring so that if some of these things change, a model is swapped, a prompt is updated, the data changes, that you have monitoring that alerts you to those changes so that you can still be sure that those outcomes haven't been impacted. When you don't know what the outcome of a change is going to be, you're kind of frozen in place. And so that would be my perspective on that.
Yeah, great points, Girish.
Sure. Great points by Michael. I think governance, first of all, gets a bad rap, maybe deserves part of it. But more, I tend to lean forward on these things. I look at governance as perhaps more of an enabling function. In the current AI world that we are all living in, I think the key is to move from manual static governance to more of a what I call continuous model. I recall last year the conversation started. The software development team needed their own AI development lifecycle. The security guys needed their own thing. The data team needed their own thing. And sometimes what I loosely call the madness has to end, right? So you need, so if every team goes and does their own separate thing, nothing will get done. So I'm a strong proponent of decentralized ownership, particularly when it comes to governance from an AI perspective. But you can't have this bureaucratic Politburo style AI centralized governance teams. That's not only limiting innovation, but also the business outcome. So I'm in favor of continuous and decentralized ownership of governance when it comes to AI.
Great points, Girish. Dave?
Again, from the perspective of structured data, what I've seen customers do is really secure the data at rest, and using you can see Snowflake and Databricks have invested really heavily very recently in RBAC and row level security, column level security, column masking, and the like. So from a structured data perspective, I mean, because you don't know how these LLMs are going to query your data, you have no clue. You have no clue who's coming in. But if you at least secure the data at rest, then you could sort of be assured that regardless of what the access method is, that if you defined your roles and your groups and your row level and column level access protocols right, that at least you have a pretty good chance to make sure that you're not going to have people accessing data they shouldn't. and AI just makes the problem worse. So I don't know how you do it more lightweight. I have no clue how to make it more lightweight, because if you do it in the beginning, then you don't have to worry about then what happens downstream. That's the idea, but that's as far as I could tell.
Yeah, and Brandon has an interesting question in the chat that I'll pop on stage, and I'm not sure if any of you want to speak to this, can speak to this, but it's an interesting one, which is how can businesses monitor and detect when employees use unauthorized AI services to protect their trade secrets? And a lot of what we've been talking about is governing data, and I think when we think of that, we think of data sets and people who are actually going to be leveraging data vis-a-vis models or applications. But there's a lot of folks in organizations that touch things that are arguably trade secrets, who may not be data folks at all, and maybe putting things into ChatGPT or another platform that then arguably have lost trade secret protections by doing that. Have you guys seen any effective ways of managing governance from that standpoint of protecting those trade secrets and detecting unauthorized AI use?
I haven't heard of any good strategies, but I definitely have heard from customers that they're definitely afraid of leakage, and then their proprietary data getting out and basically used to train general purpose LLMs. But I don't know if anybody else on the call has an answer to how you would monitor that, but I definitely know customers are very, very worried about that, and it's holding up a lot of projects for the largest enterprises out there from moving forward.
Yeah, I can jump in, Brian.
Sure.
Yeah, it's many years ago I was part of an initiative called data leakage prevention, which had kind of died out, but in the AI world it has resurfaced. To Dave's point, I don't have an exact answer of how customers are doing it, but I know what some tools are being used. So currently there are about 70 different tools that do exactly what Brandon on the webinar has asked. These are tools that actually look at what kind of data is being accessed, what are their access rights, and they're providing the right guardrails so that the corporate assets internally doesn't get leaked outside, or vice versa is also true. So that's the classic approach of a proven technology like DLP being adopted to the fast-moving AI paradigm. If there are questions, I can refer Brandon to a couple of companies that I know that are doing really well there.
Yeah, great points, Girish. Yeah, and that was a great question. And one of the other questions we have in the chat from Alex, Alex Lynn from Visa says, thanks for this convo. How are all of these considerations different for heavily regulated industries? So we talked about various different governance strategies, but you guys want to weigh in on how you think that might be different for heavily regulated industries that have to consider this even more with even more scrutiny?
I can talk about one of my customers who I can't name. They're a 130-year-old company that use predictive AI and generative AI as part of their data management, data engineering, and data quality solutions today. So I think it's often about, do you have the guardrails in place to and are you bounding the scope of whether it is machine learning or AI? How is that constructively helping the outcome? And I know we may talk about this, having the human in the loop. Do you have human in the loop to enable that? Right? That's key.
Yeah, great points.
Yeah, it's just to chime in with what Girish said. We have a lot of financial services companies, so financial services customers, and honestly, it's like they're the most reticent to actually move forward with generative AI because of those regulation, because their fears of whether they're going to be able to meet their regulatory requirements. And The one thing that has helped in those conversations is that, and I know this sounds self-serving, but since these customers already have a semantic layer, they're more comfortable putting generative AI on top of it because they've already been using that semantic layer for governance and for access for all their different BI tools, whether it be Power BI or Excel or Tableau, what have you. So I have seen it help in those sort of conversations about, well, since we do have this infrastructure in place, adding generative AI on top of it is a little bit less fearful, because at least we know that it's been used for BI in an ad hoc basis for years now.
That would be the experience that I've had as well. I'm trying to think. There's our heavily regulated customers and financial based. Credit Karma is one that is using their chatbot to provide personalized offers to their user base. And I think it's exactly what Dave said, because the data is within heavily regulated, heavily monitored, heavily, good semantic layer, well-governed processes already. It's about choosing the right use case and leveraging those structures already in place. And then knowing, AI is not the best fit for every use case.
Yep, great points. So we've talked a bit about workflows, but I want to just double click on that for a moment and dive a bit deeper. So what do you guys find in an enterprise setting, that an ideal end-to-end AI workflow could look like? Obviously, there's lots of situations where it might differ, but do you think there is some sort of a template that organizations can follow when they're thinking through, like, what does our AI workflow need to look like, from data ingestion to monitoring, observability, retraining? What are all the different components of that, and how would you kind of structure that? So Dave, why don't you kick that one off?
Well, I think there's we haven't talked about machine learning too much here, have we? We've just been talking about Gen AI, and that's been dominating the conversation. But I think there is a case where, from a workflow perspective, of course, starting with the data, you got to have the data, a good data infrastructure in place, and it's got to be secured at rest, like I mentioned before. But if you were to do sort of like a fraud detection model, I mean, you could see, right, that you could have that fraud detection model be based on machine learning, but then how you act on this, on when you do see fraud, could be a generative system to trigger some kind of an action. So I think that it's maybe not a one size fits all here, where you could sort of take and use machine learning itself for an auto ML for doing some of the things that we've traditionally done with AI, but then couple that with specific agents that actually can take actions based on those events or those insights that are uncovered.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great points. Girish?
Sure. My view, I agree with Dave, but my answer is a little bit more. It may not be something that everyone will want to hear. I think, first of all, the AI end-to-end workflow is still evolving, and that's going to disrupt many technology solution providers and most companies out there. It may not happen in the next year or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, but I think the right AI workflow, it depends. Like Michael said, for his customer, it may be different. So will it be for Dave, and so will it be for some of my customers, right? Like Verisk. So in other words, there's a lot. Last week I was in Boston at a CIO event, and the CIOs, I won't name anyone in particular, there was a consensus that their workforce and their workflows are not quite AI ready. And they're essentially bolting on AI as a technology for some productivity and efficiency gain. So I think the true AI end-to-end workflow will disrupt their business, which they may not be willing to undertake unless they do some small prototype or small new projects. So I think it's still evolving, particularly in the enterprise AI enterprise context, because I remember talking to a large retailer a few years ago. They said there are 105,000 pipelines, right? And which was developed over 22 years. They're not going to disrupt that just for AI in the next 1 year. So, and they'll prototype this, and yes, it involves all the way from the medallion architecture, and it'll frankly collapse all those things. I would argue you don't really need the medallion architecture in a true AI end-to-end workflow. You can collapse a lot of those things into a much simpler, flatter architecture.
Yeah, those are great points, and I think we're going to see probably a lot more in the next few years a shift in the discussion. I mean, are we just strapping AI onto existing workflows, or do we need to entirely reimagine workflows in light of AI? And I think you make great points there of that. You know, that's part of the tension that's going on here is how much do you reinvent the workflow? How disruptive is it versus treating it as just an extension of existing workflows? Michael, your thoughts?
Yeah, I love this question. I'm kind of chuckling, right? Like my ideal workflow, like what's my ideal workflow? It would be a data source that never changed, that sent data through a pipeline that never broke, that, you know, was perfectly retrieved by AI, that never hallucinated, and somehow I got ice cream at the end of it, right? And we all know in the enterprise and the practical world, like that ideal workflow never exists, right? I think we're all trying to go towards this place of AI readiness where I would define it, Gartner would define it as having this data accessible and this kind of source of truth, this cloud platform. You have this semantic layer, right? So AI cannot just access the data, but it understands what it means, whether that's flat or not. I think is an interesting question that Girish raises, but it will have to be very well documented, right? AI has to be able to understand it. And then that data has to be reliable, right? And so that path that we'll take is going to be constantly evolving, and it's never going to be perfect. The minute that we get close, your CDO is going to announce a migration initiative, right? It's the only constant in all of this, and data and AI is change. And so I think the question is like, how do we build for these workflows that are constantly changing? And again, I would just point to like, all right, we have to be able to know when these changes are happening and how they impact those outputs.
Yeah, great points. And as a follow-up to that, you know, a lot of organizations prior to all the buzz around generative AI had many existing projects around predictive AI and many other data science and machine learning projects as well in their pipeline. So how can organizations unify those efforts with a lot of the new things that are being demanded of them in light of the rapid advances in generative AI? How do you unify those efforts across your teams? Michael, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I think the easy-ish answer to this is have a central source of truth. And I think that place is going to be that data warehouse or lakehouse where a lot of these efforts need to unify. A lot of the organizations that are leaders in this space, they have their data, they have their inputs to their AI, and their outputs to AI. It exists in this warehouse or lakehouse, and it's all consolidated. Is their source of truth, is where they can consolidate some of these governance or monitoring type efforts. And so I think whether that is a ML application, what we used to call a data product, or an AI product, or some other analytical product, something that data is powering, have that source of truth be consolidated within that warehouse or lakehouse.
Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I just definitely echo that. And single source of truth is really important. You got to be working with consistent data, but also maybe add that choosing the best tool for the job. So everybody wants to do Gen AI and use LLMs to do all the work, but maybe plain old machine learning and auto ML might be the best approach, or to combine the two, like I mentioned before, in that fraud detection model. So it's like anything. I think choosing the best tool for the job is something that we should consider, and it doesn't mean that LLMs are the best choice for every AI problem that you see out there.
Great points, Krish.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. For me, I think they're quite complementary, and they can work together. Let me illustrate why. Just to give a Revify example, I'd mentioned previously that we connect to the data platforms and we baseline the data, and we provide out-of-the-box insights for quality, data reliability, performance, and cost snapshots. Those are all done through predictive AI, classic machine learning, statistical models, and some AI. And then we use Gen AI as an interface So this is a classic case where Gen AI is the interface for predictive AI. I mean, I'm not a believer of death by dashboards concept. Maybe I am. So everyone loves their dashboards. But imagine the chief data officer or CIO or anyone saying, okay, tell me what a little bit more. You have to file a Atlassian Jira ticket. It goes to someone and it takes a day, week, or 2 weeks to get a result, right? With Gen AI now, you can get results on your existing data set or existing dashboards. That's where Gen AI adds complements that. And the reverse is also true. Gen AI, we all talked, Michael mentioned, Dave mentioned, I also mentioned, it hallucinates, the answers are wrong. I can use predictive AI as a front end for Gen AI results. So those are two examples. And now with this complementary approaches, you can have the human in the loop. That's exactly what we are doing. We baseline and say, these are your insights, go do this yourself. These are the steps. You can fix the code. Here is the code. Or you can have Gen AI do that for you. In other words, they work hand in hand. They're quite complementary. They work in unison with your workflows. That's I think the reality now that's happening. And if companies have not adopted that, I think they'll get there in the next couple of weeks to months to a year.
Yeah, excellent points, Girish. So now I want to get to our lightning round. Got just a few minutes left here. So for our lightning round, in one phrase or a couple, what would be your top piece of advice for leaders that are looking to scale AI within large enterprises? Dave, why don't we start with you on that?
I guess one phrase I'd just say is learn fast. One of the things that things are moving so fast, and I think that with the customers that I see that are actually experimenting and trying things out are just way ahead of the belly button gazers. I just think you gotta, I know we've been talking a lot about how to go from POC to production, but the POC still is pretty important, and it's pretty important to learn what works and what the capabilities are to know where you have gaps. And then just on a tactical thing, I've been really amazed with Model Context Protocol, MCP. And the reason why I've been amazed with it is that providing sort of like there's all this corpus of data that is trapped in an enterprise that an LLM just doesn't have access to. And trying to provide access to that LLM, to that data, is really hard, but MCP makes it really easy and structured. And I think that companies can build their own MCP servers to expose that data to their LLMs and create some pretty amazing agents that are acting upon their data and their workflows. So definitely take a look at that, but definitely try things out and learn and experiment, because you'll be left behind very, very soon if you don't.
Great points, Dave. Girish?
I'll give the data practitioner perspective here. So what I would encourage and implore the audience to do is to start with high priority outcomes that align with your business. Pick the outcomes or use cases that can be automated. And I'm of the view that AI agents for data management and data cost optimization are not only enterprise proven, and they're ready for prime time, both in commercial, enterprise, as well as regulated environments.
Great points. Michael?
Yeah, my advice would be to ship, right? Just get started, similar to Dave's advice, but don't ship and hope, right? Ship and validate. That would be my advice.
Yeah, excellent points. Well, really enjoyed the discussion, guys. Great insights from all of you. Thanks to everyone in our audience for joining today. If you missed any of the webinar or want to rewatch anything, the recording will be available just a few minutes after this webinar concludes if you just refresh this page, and we'll send out the recording on our YouTube channel tomorrow. Thanks again to all of our panelists here today, as well as our partners at AtScale, Monte Carlo, and Rev, making this great discussion possible. We'll see you all again next time. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.